Welcome to this week's Iraq briefing, where we discuss the top stories shaping Iraq today. I'm Eric Gustafson.
And I'm Omar Nidawi.
So today's topic, explaining Iraq's judiciary and the latest crisis. You can look back to our previous episode in February of this year, where we talked about the clash of the courts. And so this is not a new development. This has been an ongoing story. So for today's episode, we hope to make sense of the latest crisis in Iraq's judiciary. Just late last month, Chief Justice Jazem Omeri of Iraq's federal Supreme Court resigned. And on July 3rd, not long after, his replacement was sworn in. So, Omar, can you quickly give us a background and explain what just happened?
Iraq's judiciary is not new to controversies. It has been embroiled in political decisions since 2010 in the infamous situation when the court allowed Nur al-Maliki at the time to gain a second term in office. And the court has been involved in some highly sensitive and controversial political disputes in recent years. And this has escalated very rapidly in the last month, leading to a fallout within the court itself and between the court and the Supreme Judicial Council that led to the resignation, or more technically accurate, the retirement of Judge Jassim Al-Omeri, the head of the Federal Supreme Court. So what happened in quick succession was that on June 23rd, on June 19, nine members of the court, six active judges on the bench and three reserve judges, said that they were going to resign, protesting what they described as the involvement of the court in political, machinations, that the court was being subjected to political pressure, and also to protest poor management, what was described as poor management by Judge Omeri. A few days later, on June 23rd, we saw reports that Judge Omeri himself was submitting his resignation. And on June 30th, we saw that Judge Omeri was retired for health reasons. And almost immediately, a new judge was nominated to replace him, Judge Mundar Hussein, who is the deputy chief of Iraq's Court of Cassation, which is the highest court within the ordinary court system. And Judge Mundar was sworn in on July 3rd by Iraq's president. He was nominated by Iraq's Supreme Judicial Council, which is the body that is entrusted with the management of Iraq's courts. So, quick turn of events, and immediately after Judge Omeri resigned and Judge Mundar was appointed to replace him, the nine judges that had resigned last month came back to the court. They basically withdrew their resignations, and they were welcomed back into the court by Judge Faiq Zaidan. Judge Faiq Zaidan is, for Iraq watchers, is not a new entity. He is the head of the Supreme Judicial Council and the head of the Court of Cassation. In his meeting with the judges, he basically welcomed them back and thanked them for their decision to return now that the cause for their resignation has gone. And that's I think, an implicit reference to Judge Omeri and to the disputes between the two men.
So before I ask my next question, if you could briefly explain the relationship between these bodies, because for those that are unfamiliar with Iraq's judiciary, it can be a bit confusing. But you mentioned the Federal Supreme Court, you mentioned the Judicial Council, the Supreme Judicial Council, and the Court of Cassation. So can you explain just a little bit about them and how they relate to each other?
Yeah, in a nutshell, you have the ordinary courts, and you have the Court of Cassation, which is the ultimate court that decides on the decisions and disputes related to the ordinary courts. And then you have the Federal Supreme Court, which is very similar to the Supreme Court in the United States. It's tasked with resolving disputes between different branches of government, between provincial governments and the federal government, and so forth. And it's the highest court of the land, tasked with protecting the Constitution and interpreting the Constitution. And then you have the Supreme Judicial Council, which is really a management body. It's tasked with appointing judges, managing the affairs, the administrative affairs of the lower courts, and it's also has a role in nominating the judges who sit on the federal Supreme Court.
And also disciplining justices and judges.
Correct.
Cool. So Iraq's judiciary was designed, right, in theory, to be independent with no power above it except the law, the rule of law. However, I mean, based on what you were sharing, it leads to questions about political influence. So, what do we know about the alleged political pressure on the Chief Justice that led to this resignation and this controversy?
Well, there are certainly political pressures. What's a little bit opaque sometimes is we don't know exactly who's applying them and to what end. But the court is bombarded by accusations of political pressure. And it really shows in the communications between the court itself and the political leadership. So while the 9 judges who resigned initially in last month were accusing Judge Omeri of involving the court or subjecting the court to political pressure, Omeri himself was suggesting that he was under political pressure and that the court itself was put in a tough position. Just before he submitted his resignation, he sent a letter to the president of Iraq and to the Speaker of Parliament, Mahmoud al-Mashadani, telling them that the court is really in a tough spot. He was asking for the political leaders of the country to confer, to come together, to meet and make a decision, basically a political consensus decision on a number of specific cases that are being debated in order to basically protect the court from having to make conflicting decisions and from ruining its reputation further and from undermining its credibility in the eye of the public. Both requests were rejected, and in the case of Speaker Mashadani, his response actually indicated that there are a lot of disputes within the court itself or within the judicial system, saying, don't get us dragged into this. If there are judicial disputes or if there are disputes within the judicial establishment, those need to be resolved internally. And of course, I think that is an indication, or that's pointing to disputes and turf battles between Judge Omeri and Judge Zaidan, who have different relationships and different bases of power or different backers within the powerful coordination framework. A lot of analysts and a lot of watchers suggest that Judge Omeri is very close to Hadi al-Amiri and the head of the Badr organization and to former Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki. We saw, for example, that Amiri and Maliki had nominated Judge Omeri's son to be the governor of Diyala province. And there are tribal and local connections involved there. That was last year during the fight over the governorship in Diyala. And there are, of course, other sources and analyses pointing to connections between Judge Zaidan and Asabah al-Haq and Kitab Hezbollah. There are overlaps in and overlapping interests and alliances here. The 2 cases that are, I think, at the center of the current situation are a case relating to the dispute between the federal government and the Kurdistan regional government over the payment of salaries to public sector workers in Kurdistan and the oil revenue of the Kurdistan region. And the other one is related to an earlier court decision, federal Supreme Court decision, to nullify a maritime border treaty between Iraq and Kuwait. And there are, political parties that want these cases to go in different directions, and that definitely has exerted a lot of, I think, of shearing forces on the court and on the relationship between Judge Omeri and Judge Zaidan that led to things finally snapping.
Wow. Well, you just covered a lot of ground, a lot for us to think about. What can you tell us about Judge Omeri's replacement, who will now be in the Supreme Court? And I don't understand, like, you can clarify this. will he assume the Chief Justice role within the court? So what can you tell us about this replacement and the role that he'll play?
Well, we don't know really too much about Judge Munder Hussein, except that he has been the deputy chief of the Court of Cassation under Faiq Zaidan since 2018, a graduate of the Baghdad School of Law. But beyond that, he's not a high-profile individual. And yeah, on your question on is he going to be the chief judge, that's a fairly, I think, good analogy. The chief justice or the chief of the court presides over the court meetings and speaks on behalf of the court, but all votes are equal within the nine-member bench.
But you're still like the one thing I'm just hearing from you is that the fact that he's coming from the Court of Cassation under Justice Zaidan suggests that there is, in a sense, Zaidan's, if there is a turf battle, and that's one way of looking at what's going on, that the side that Zaidan is part of is seems to be winning that turf battle.
That I think is yeah, that's a good suggestion. That makes sense. And I think Judge Zaidan's words they speak for themselves. He did point to Judge Omeri as a problem, as an obstacle to the smooth functioning of the court. And he acknowledged that, or he expressed that when he welcomed back the nine judges who had resigned, again because of alleged poor performance and politicization by Omeri. So he called him the reason for this malfunction, for this dysfunction, and expressed relief that he was gone. And the two judges had clashed in the past. We covered this, I think, back in February when uh, Iraq's parliament passed three controversial laws. One of them was the amendment to the personal status law. The other one was an amendment to the general amnesty law, and another one was related to the return of land confiscated by the Ba'ath Party regime back in the 70s. Those three laws raised a lot of objections from different parts of the political sphere, of the political stage in Iraq. And the court at the time issued an injunction blocking these three laws. There was a lot of complaints about the way in which the laws were passed, and there were complaints about the substance of some of the laws. Now, you know, a lot of people were complaining about these laws for completely different reasons. Doesn't mean that these people were aligned together. In any case, Judge Zaidan at the time actually dismissed the court's decision as invalid, and within 24 hours, the court reversed course. And that's, I think, was as a very indicative case of friction between the two sides, because according to the law, Judge Zaidan is not in position to make judgments about the federal Supreme Court, whose rulings should be above all other judicial entities.
All right. Well, this is definitely an ongoing story, and you can see it carried through multiple issues of ISHM. That's the Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor, our weekly monitoring reports. You can also, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, Omar, but you can get a copy of the letter that Speaker Mashhadani had sent to Judge Omeri.
That's correct.
Okay, okay. And by the way, in that letter, I find it interesting. It talks kind of about turf and even political battles within the judiciary, but doesn't talk about legal questions, which is if it's truly an independent judiciary, the questions about all of these matters, no matter how controversial, should always be legal questions and related to the Constitution of Iraq. But no, it seems to be more, not making too many people upset on one side or the other.
Yeah. If I may, like, just give one takeaway to our viewers here is that there are, of course, a lot of unknowns about the exact nature of the behind the scenes uh, disagreements and fights between all of these powerful judges and politicians. But I think we should not be under any illusion that this is between a a side that wants to protect the independence of the judiciary, and a party or a side that wants to apply political pressure on the judiciary. In my view, this is most likely a situation where there are two sides that want to apply different political pressures on the judiciary and want to use the judiciary for their own purposes, but they have competing interests. So it's not a fight of good and bad. It's just a political fight that's unfolding on the stage of Iraq's Federal Supreme Court.
Well, yeah, and it I think speaks to the weakness in a sense of the judiciary to be able to exercise its independence within that system. So that was great analysis. Thank you so much, Omar. This is your latest episode of your Iraq briefing. You can follow us. Please subscribe to our channel, and you can also see the Isham and our latest Ishams at enablingpeace.org. I also want to just quickly announce thank you so much for everybody who donated and supported our Summer of Hope. It is fully funded and moving forward. In fact, as we speak, the girls and now also six teenage boys have been added to the program. So we have 26 kids that are part of the Summer of Hope program as we speak. So thank you so much for your contributions. And that's it for today. Masalama.
Ma